The indicator on the x-axis is income per person. In other words, it is the gross domestic product of the country divided by the total population and adjusted for differences in purchasing power. In this video, I will refer to it as GDP. The indicator on the y-axis is child mortality, the number of deaths of children under 5 years of age per 1,000 live births. GDP per capita is a financial measure, while the child mortality is a health measure. Moreover, I've chosen these two indicators because they are correlated between each other by the fact that if the people from a country have a stable income, if they are not in extreme poverty, earning more than 1.25 US dollars per day, then they will have more access to healthcare and the resources to maintain a good sanitation, good nutrition, and an overall good standard of living. This will lead to healthier mothers and healthier babies, hence a low child mortality rate. Furthermore, if people have low incomes, then they will have fewer resources to maintain good sanitation and nutrition, and the child mortality rate will be higher. The first graph shows the development of these two indicators in Turkmenistan from 1800 to 2012. From 1800 until 1916, there was generally an increase in the income with small fluctuations. So from 1800 till 1916, small fluctuations but generally increasing. From 1917 till 1918, there was a substantial decrease in the GDP. The cause may be a violent uprising in 1916, in which the Turkmen defeated the Russians and obtained their independence that lasted until 1918. The altering of Turkmenistan's relationship with the USSR may have had a big impact on Turkmenistan's exports, leading to a decrease in GDP. Starting with 1922, the GDP starts to increase once again, as the USSR regained its control over Turkmenistan and on the country's economy. From 1939 till 1946, there is another slight decrease in the GDP. 1939, 1946. This is the period of time in which World War II took place. The USSR suffered many financial losses because of the fighting, and these losses most probably affected negatively the economy of Turkmenistan, which was part of the Soviet Union at that time. From 1946, the GDP starts to rise once again. As the USSR recovers from the war, new plants are built in Central Asian cities, including in two Turkmen cities. As a result, new jobs are created and so more incomes, both having a positive effect on the GDP. From 1978, the GDP starts to decrease once again. So around here, it starts to decrease once again, with more substantial changes between 1991 and 1997. This was a period of transition for Turkmenistan. In 1991, Turkmenistan proclaimed its independence from the USSR and lost the latter's economic support. As a result, after 1992, the output of the gas production was reduced by more than 40%, mainly due to the fact that Russia refused to allow Turkmenistan gas transportation through its territory. In 1998, the GDP started to increase slightly, probably due to the fact that in that year, the value of total exports had risen sharply because of increases in international oil and gas prices. So from here, it starts to increase once again. The second indicator, child mortality, has a continuous decrease over the years, with the exception of the year 1969, when it slightly increased. The reason may be that in 1969 there were local outbreaks and sporadic cases of cholera that affected infants as well as adults. The situation soon got better, and the child mortality rate continued to decrease. So it's around Here, 1969, it increased and then decreased once again. The second graph illustrates the progress of the two indicators in Suriname between the same period of time, 1800 and 2012. Between 1800 and 1924, the child mortality varied almost insignificantly. Then, starting with 1924, the rate decreased with each year. There are no substantial differences from one year to the other. The decrease, starting with 1924, may be the result of the abolishment of slavery in 1863. People who used to be slaves started to be paid for their work. Furthermore, in 1916, the American Company of America began mining bauxite, which gradually became Suriname's main export. These two main events contributed to both the economic development and the economic growth of Suriname. Moreover, the positive effects were seen after some years as an improved standard of living with a lower child mortality rate. As it can be seen in the graph, around 1978, the GDP decreased and there was a period of fluctuations between 1978 and 1994. So there are fluctuations. During these years, there was political turbulence in Suriname that most probably had a negative effect on the economy. The event that had the biggest impact on Suriname's economy took place in 1982, when the Netherlands, Suriname's largest benefactor, stopped giving financial aid to the military group that had taken power by force and was ruling the country. The absence of the Dutch aid led to economic deterioration. However, after the return to a more or less democratically elected government in 1991, Dutch aid resumed. The inconsistency of the Dutch aid may have determined the fluctuations in the GDP. From 2000, the GDP raised once again, and the reason may be the fact that a new government was established since that year, and it managed to achieve a level of macroeconomic stability. The third graph illustrates the progress of the two indicators in New Zealand. As it may be seen in the graph, around 1853, the child mortality rate decreased. This may be related to the fact that this year held more peaceful relations between New Zealand government and the indigenous Maori. The fact that there weren't frequent armed conflicts assured the fact that families remained intact. The loss of a parent, and especially the father who supported financially the family, could have put the mother and her child in a difficult situation. The possible lack of money could have led to the lack of food, the deterioration of the health of the child, and finally to the death of the infant. More peaceful times helped avoid these kind of situations. From 1862 to 1863, there is a sharp increase in the child mortality rate. This may have happened due to the fact that the peak of the hostilities in the New Zealand Wars took place in 1963. The big number of casualties among the soldiers of both sides made many families suffer financially, and as mentioned before, this could have affected the well-being of the young children. The wars lasted until around 1972, so around here, and as seen in the graph, there are fluctuations in the child mortality rate over this amount of time. Furthermore, in 1918, a lethal influenza pandemic struck New Zealand. Among the people affected, there were children as well. And if we go back to 1918, we can see like here, it's the increase in the child mortality rate. The second indicator, GDP, generally grows over the years. However, it can be clearly seen that around the 1930s, the GDP decreased. In the early 1930s, New Zealand experienced the Great Depression, which was most probably the cause of the drop in GDP. Exports fell by 45% in 2 years. National income by 40% in 3 years. At the worst point of the depression, the number of the unemployed may have exceeded 70,000. New Zealand started to recover from the depression around 1935. around 1935. In 1967, there is another small decrease in GDP that may have happened because at the end of 1916, at the end of 1966, the price of wool fell dramatically by around 40% as synthetic fiber replaced wool. The change in the price of wool had a substantial impact on the economy of New Zealand due to the fact that this material used to be the country's #1 export. In order to recover economically, New Zealand diversified its markets. For example, it started to produce pharmaceuticals derived from milk fractions and offal. This most probably helped the GDP recover.